Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. Election day is coming near, and people do tend to be seeing the idea that politics can affect your life. So I guess saying that makes some sense. Anyway, with me today, Kent Redfield is back. He is Professor Emeritus of Political Science, University of Illinois, Springfield. Still keeping very busy. Not everyone retires and then stays as busy as Kent, but Kent, welcome back.
Good to be here.
Okay, thanks. And Jerry Nowicki is here. He is State House Bureau Chief for Capitol News, Illinois. And Jerry, thank you for coming back.
Thank you, Bernie.
Okay. Jerry, I'm going to go to you first. One of the things on the November 3rd ballot, and as we know, a lot of people have voted already in Illinois through early vote and through mail-in vote, as is happening across the country as well. But there is this ongoing debate about the progressive income tax. The governor wants it. It would take change Illinois' constitution to remove the requirement that any income tax on individuals all be at the same rate. Jerry, where is this going? We see a lot of television commercials on those commercial stations and a lot of things online. What's going on and how's it looking?
Yeah, so to pass, it'll take 60% of those voting on the particular question, but there's also another route to passage, which is if more than half of the voters voting in the election in general vote for it. So it seems to me that with all these ads and all this exposure that's happening with this amendment, you might be able to get it on that greater than 50% threshold, depending on how many people choose not to vote on the amendment. That'll be the big question there. But essentially what it does is the state is looking for ways to bring in more revenue. And the way the governor has described it, it's either 15% across the board cuts to state agencies, which he says are hollowed out already by the 2-year budget impasse and other budget cuts. And then there's the option of raising the flat tax by 20%, which would put it right at about 6% for everybody in Illinois. And then the other option is the graduated tax, he says, which would bring in about $3.4 billion in a full year once it's up and running. But of course, the other side says, if you give the state power to raise taxes on just a certain portion of the electorate, it'll be politically much easier for them to raise taxes, and say this bracket here or this bracket there, and then they'd, of course, nickel and dime you. So that's sort of the way that discussion is playing out.
Yeah, one of the issues that has been talked about a lot is retirement income, and if it will be taxed. It is not taxed now in Illinois. It has been considered somewhat the third rail in Illinois politics for a number of years to even mention taxing retirement income in Illinois. Many states do. I think most states do. Illinois does not. And Treasurer Mike Frerichs, who's a Democrat, just mentioned at talking to a civic group or something up in the suburbs some time ago, well, this would allow that, but he didn't advocate for it. The governor says he's against it. All the Democratic legislative leaders are definitely against it, but the opposition, through some use of a lot of ads, is saying, oh, they could tax your retirement income and, I got to live on my Social Security. The whole idea of the people who want the progressive income tax, including the governor, is that they would tax only under the rates already passed by the legislature. If this takes effect, people making over $250,000 a year would see higher taxes and everybody else would see, they have said the same or lower. Now they mentioned that it's lower. It's just a little bit lower than the 4.95% across the board now. But Jerry, that issue of the retirement tax was also an issue that the Illinois Policy Institute, which is a libertarian kind of think tank that really doesn't like state taxes at all and is dead set against this, they went to court to try to get the blue sheet that was sent by the Secretary of State to everybody in the state, giving an explanation of each side. The explanation for the people who want this say this will not raise your there's nothing in this amendment that raises taxes on retirement or imposes an income tax on retirement. They wanted people to be sent another sheet or for instructions saying, oh, it could happen to go in polling places, but that didn't happen because that was thrown out of court, correct?
The temporary restraining order was denied. The case hasn't been thrown out, and I don't know what's going to happen next in terms of hearings. But the judge said, you have filed this document claiming this is an emergency, yet you waited till the first week in October to file this after everything's been printed and distributed to voters. And they also said, you haven't clearly demonstrated at all that this is an emergency. So, I don't know that case is going to go anywhere. But on the retirement tax, the important thing to note is if Democrats, or I should say lawmakers, wanted to tax retirement, they could do that right now with or without this amendment. It would just have to be the same flat tax on every penny of income. Whereas what the treasurer was sort of getting at was you could maybe include retirement income in the top bracket at $250,000. Say no one has said they wanted to do that. And as you said, the third rail, I think Treasurer Frericks has realized that he went ahead and touched the third rail, and he gave a lot of ammunition to the opposition groups. But yeah, retirement income could be taxed right now if lawmakers
and the governor was asked about it again this week, as he often is, and he said he's absolutely against it. So certainly that's not the intention of what's going on. Kent, speaking of court hearings and this and that, there was a court hearing in Springfield this week in Sangamon County for a number of consolidated cases concerning the restrictions that the governor has imposed on various parts of the state and at times the whole state concerning the COVID-19 outbreak. There's Tom DeVore is a lawyer who has represented various legislators who say the governor overstepped his bounds. And so far that case is ongoing, but the governor has not been found at fault. Darren Bailey from Xenia, Illinois, in Southern Illinois is kind of the lead plaintiff in these things, saying the governor overstepped his bounds and doesn't really have the right to tell each county that they have a public health crisis. But Kent, where are those cases? Because again, that's an ongoing saga that it started in Clay County with a judge siding with Darren Bailey, but other judges so far have not.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, this would move up to the state Supreme Court particularly if there were a ruling against the governor, then and some type of restraining order, then that would have to be resolved by the state Supreme Court. If they rule against these lawsuits in state court, the appellate court or the state Supreme Court could just refuse to take it and not hear it. The governor has prevailed in federal cases. He has prevailed at the trial court level in almost all of the state cases. So the expectation is that there probably will eventually be some clarity in terms of the Supreme Court getting some kind of appeal, but the law has never been interpreted in terms of how many times you can renew an emergency exactly. But beyond that, it's a very broad grant of power to the chief executive. And, you say a tornado doesn't last very long. A pandemic lasts a long time.
Longer than we all thought, isn't it?
Yes. And if you had a nuclear war, there might not be a legislature that could meet to discuss whatever the governor was doing. And so of necessity, it's drawn very broadly. And the governor will probably win in terms of this. But Representative, soon to be State Senator Bailey, will continue to get publicity out of this, as will his attorney. And so you're feeding a narrative about overreaching government, and these are some pretty common themes in American politics these days. But generally the courts have upheld the powers of governors to deal with public health. And if this isn't a public health crisis, I'm not sure what is.
Yeah, I know, Representative, and as you say, soon to be Senator Bailey, he talks a lot about how, killing businesses is the wrong way to go and let people open. He's really a fan of kind of the way President Trump is going. But Illinois, if you look at it entirely, is generally, I think, not in that camp. And I know when we talk about the coming election, the suburbs, which used to near Chicago, which used to be very Republican, have gone more Democrat. I heard that President Trump is down maybe 30% in those areas. But in far southern Illinois, where Representative Bailey is from, this idea of President Trump is the right guy and freedom for businesses is the right way is apparently much more popular. I know he has been mentioned or maybe even talked about himself running for governor someday, so we'll see where that goes. Again, if that movement to excise Illinois from the rest of the state and make it its own state doesn't happen, the politics of that may be difficult, but we'll see. And Representative Bailey was one of those who advocated for that at the time. Anyway, Jerry, we're talking about the pandemic, and I know you are pretty good on keeping up on numbers nationwide. We're seeing some spikes again. How is Illinois doing in the fight against COVID? And the governor has had to have some recent updates and warnings, even though Illinois has been more cautious about opening than many other states.
Yeah, there's a lot of the numbers are going up right now. He said this week from this week's period, from the week prior, all 11 regions are sort of seeing upticks in their positivity rate, and that you could see that on the statewide level as well, which I think for 10 days, the 7-day rolling average has increased, and it's at 4.6% right now. And if you look at the graphs, the line's sort of going upward right now, which left unchecked, that can exponentially grow. And the other thing is it's sort of translating into hospitalizations too, where you can see there's, I think at the end of whatever the numbers reported yesterday, there was over 1,900, and that hasn't happened since June. And that's when it was on the way down from up in the 2,000s to 3,000s. I think it was close to 5,000 at the height of the pandemic. So we're nearing 2,000 right now. Hospitalizations and ICU bed usage is up. Ventilators are still sort of near their lows, but there's also, I know the medical experts have sort of made ventilators less and less of a priority. They try other methods because a lot of the people who were going on ventilators were not ever coming off of them alive. So the numbers are growing.
Yeah, and as far as I recall, is the Rockford area is still under kind of the extra mitigation? Is that right? One of the 11 areas of the state that still is, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I think they were the only one right now. Their positivity rate is going up. I think their mitigations have been in place since October 3rd, but the positivity rate there was over 10% for the first time, I think, yesterday. So
right. Yeah, and when we talk about mitigations, of course, we're talking about no indoor service for bars or restaurants if you do that. What's interesting down in the Metro East, the lawyer for Representative Bailey, Tom DeVore, who's very strong on his opinion that just let businesses open. I heard him on the radio recently saying that in Southern Illinois, when near the St. Louis area, when there was these mitigations in place because that area had risen in cases and positivity rate, meaning, of course, the percentage of tests that come back positive. He said a lot of the businesses were just not listening to the governor. Everywhere you go, they were open anyway. And so why do this charade? And that's kind of the attitude in some places. And, we see it here and there. It's just kind of an interesting phenomenon. It's a little bit regional. I think masks wearing may be more popular in Chicago than in some of the more rural and smaller towns, but it seems to be a continual cultural fight over if you should wear a mask, if you should actually socially distance and keep businesses that way. And Illinois is diverse, and we're seeing some of the diversity play out in a public health way, a public health issue, and that's just really interesting and different.
And I would doubt that if you go into any bars, you're finding too many masks anywhere you go.
Well, being in my basement right now, I just don't know what to say about it. So we'll see. We mentioned the election coming up, and Kent, um, we have some competing situations in Illinois. We're quite a Democratic state right now, but the Democratic House Speaker has been, mentioned in this ongoing investigation of Commonwealth Edison. There was a special House committee about that, which is no longer having any hearings until after the election, which has taken Madigan off the lead of all of these shows like ours because we're not having the fireworks going on. But Republicans, certainly downstate, are still using Madigan against almost every Democratic candidate. And yet President Trump, as I mentioned earlier, and particularly in certain parts of the state, is not popular, although he remains popular in some places. So Kent, any idea what this does as our legislature has, every House candidate and many of the Senate candidates up for election November 3rd, which is less than 3 weeks away now?
Yeah, I mean, the Republicans have been running against the Speaker for since 2013 when Bruce Rauner came on the scene, but that has not been particularly successful. In 2018, the Democrats picked up 8 houses in the suburbs, 8 House seats in the suburbs, 3 Senate seats in the suburbs, and they lost 1 House seat in Southern Illinois. So we have kind of historic majorities in terms of the Democrats. The other problem the Republicans have is that their billionaire patrons, Bruce Rauner, Ken Griffin, who's funding the anti-graduated income tax, and then Richard Euland, who used to run a very large conservative PAC that spent about $10 million a year in House races and Senate races. He's pretty much given up on funding legislative elections in Illinois. And so the Republicans have a huge money problem on top of the question of whether it's more of a handicap to have Mike Madigan as the Speaker or to have Donald Trump at the top of the ballot when you go in to vote. And so the Republicans are targeting 3 downstate House seats and 1 Senate seat, the Senate seat in Peoria. The 2 House seats that are a little bit north of the true Metro East area, and then the last remaining downstate Southern Illinois Democrat outside the Metro East area, in what's the 116th that kind of runs around the border there. And so they've got a possibility to pick up at least one of those, and one probably not. One is kind of up in the air. It's not clear why they're going after the longtime incumbent in Peoria, except that with only a third of the Senate up, there's not many targets, but they are going after Senator Kohler from Peoria.
Yeah, Dave, right. Mm-hmm.
Up in the suburbs, Oberweis' seat is up, and he's gone for Congress, his Senate seat. So the Democratic Senate, the Democrats think they can get that Senate seat. And then there are a number of House seats, some that were picked up by the Democrats in the suburbs 2 years ago, and some Republican incumbents who are under a lot of pressure. So,
right. And a couple of those are Grant Worley and Deanne Mazzocchi, who were both on that Madigan commission, right, and making a lot of Madigan, but both of them are under some fire. And Mazzocchi apparently used to run kind of a funny social media, quote of the day kind of a thing that's gotten her in some trouble for some rude comments she made about Democrats and folks some years back before she was in the House. So that's become an issue up there as well.
Right. So these are all local, but they have kind of, there is a state kind of context to this. And it is certainly possible that the Democrats might even expand their majorities in the House and the Senate. Regardless of what happens, the Democrats will be in control, and Southern Illinois will be more Republican and less or almost not Democratic at all. And the suburbs will be more Democratic. That has a big impact for whose interests who pays attention to what interests when we get to the General Assembly. So we are becoming more Republican, and more the politics is more centered in northeastern Illinois.
You said more Republican. You mean more Democratic?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
statewide, we're becoming more Democratic.
Yeah, which is
politics
right.
are centered in the Northeast.
When all of this issue hit about Commonwealth Edison and Mike Madigan, it sure looked like that was positive for the Republicans. But the controversies over President Trump have just, ballooned. And then now healthcare is a big issue again, certainly nationally, but that becomes a state issue as well with Medicaid, partly because, of the Supreme Court ongoing confirmation process of someone who has expressed doubts about decisions that have kept Obamacare alive. Anyway, Jerry, if I can go to you, a lot of thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people, and maybe more, have voted already in Illinois. With all the talk about mail-in ballots being potentially problematic, but with early voting well established in Illinois, I think things are going reasonably calmly in Illinois so far as I can tell. I know in Sangamon County, Clerk Don Gray said earlier last week that 23,000 people had already voted, 6,000 early votes, people coming in the office to vote, and 17,000 mail-in ballots had already been received.
Well, and it seems like anytime you write a story about the number of vote-by-mail ballots, by the time you click publish, there's already more counted by the State Board of Elections. So they're growing exponentially. There was over 2 million. This was a couple of days ago when I checked, so my numbers are already going to be out of date, but there's already over 2 million vote-by-mail ballots requested. And I think roughly 20% of them were returned. So, and then there's vote by mail,
early voting. And
so there's many ways for people to cast their ballots. And that's, as I said earlier in the show, it'll be interesting how many of them actually vote on the graduated tax amendment, because that's going to make a big difference as to whether they need 60% or 50%. So.
Right. Interesting. I will mention, obviously, a central Illinois race that's of interest is the 13th Congressional District. Rodney Davis, the incumbent, seeking a fifth two-year term. Betsy Dirksen-Londrigan, a Democrat from Springfield. They had another debate in Normal this week, their second. I found it interesting. She made a much bigger issue this time than she has in the past of Rodney Davis being an honorary co-chair of President Trump's campaign. The 13th Congressional District is kind of split between the parties. She's been kind of quiet about Trump because he's been popular here, and I'm just wondering if his continuing problems have made her decide to move more talking about Rodney Davis being silent as Trump does bad things, and yet Davis keeps linking her to Nancy Pelosi and radical Democrats, despite the fact that she's moderate. She mentioned during the debate she's not for the Green New Deal. But the ads are linking her to Madigan and Pelosi. Betsy's ads have linked Rodney Davis to Trump just a little, but in the debate, she mentioned it several times. So it's just kind of interesting. Kent, I'll move on to another interesting race that the state is watching. The state Supreme Court has Thomas Kilbride is, I think it's the 3rd district, if I'm correct.
Yes.
And every 10 years, there's a retention fight, and this is a big money issue. So tell us where that's at, Kent.
Well, it's about $3 million on the Kilbride side, and about $2.5 million on the anti-retention side.
And Kilbride, of course, is a Democrat, and the court has a Democratic tilt at this point, correct?
4-3, yes. And of the anti-Kilbride, $3 million of that is our friend Ken Griffin, who's also funding the anti-tax. The trial lawyers and the trade unions and teacher unions are backing Kilbride. Kilbride has done a very good job of building his reputation within the district and his visibility. So we'll see whether money makes any difference. But this is a high profile. If Kilbride is not retained, we've got an open partisan Supreme Court election coming up in 2 years, along with the governor's race. So,
and can you remind me, in order to be retained, what is the standard?
You need 60% of those voting on the issue of whether or not to retain him. And we've never failed to retain a Supreme Court justice, but we've come close with Justice Carmire in the 5th District in 2014. So we'll see. Yeah, I'm not. These are not advertised. These are not advertisements for why you ought to elect judges and then retain them, given how much big money can come into politics and how bad that looks. That it makes the judiciary look when it looks like justice is for sale to the highest bidder.
Well, we will keep an eye on that. And with that, we are out of time. So Kent Redfield and Jerry Nowicki, thank you so much for joining me. I'm Bernie Schoenburg, and thank all of you out there for joining us. And we'll see you next time on Capitol View.